Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois. And today is Monday. I hope you're having a lovely day. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you happen to be watching on, assuming that you're watching live, and they will show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And my subject today is animism. But before we get to animism, I thought I'd talk a little bit about my weekend. I had one of the busiest weekends I've had in quite a while. And as a result, I'm moving rather slow this morning. But I'm moving. And on Friday, I attended a special equinox event at Earth Spirit Emporium here in Danville. That was a lovely afternoon. Hello to Reverend Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. Um, That was a lovely all-day event on Saturday. I started the day with the final installment of Sir Edward's Pagan Power class, which was quite delightful and recorded for posterity. Hello, Mary. Cavalcante in the chat room. Hello, Antonio in the chat room. It's good to see you. And hello, Bimby in the chat room. It's good to see you. Then I went back to our Spirit Emporium for a full day of reading, which also included some unexpected ritual work and some cleansing work, including a ritual with some unexpected pyrotechnics. I published a photo of some of the aftermath of that. That was quite interesting. Hello to Mystique in the chat room. And then yesterday, hello to Renee in the chat room. Yesterday we had our real-time equinox celebration here in the Danville area with Pure Sanctuary Temple and Travelers Grove at Forest Glen Nature Preserve. It was a lovely ritual. I do want to take a moment to extend my condolences to Dee Polacek and her family. Her husband went to meet his ancestors yesterday morning, and I know that this is a very difficult time for her. After that, I had our online equinox ritual here on Corellian TV with Reverend Mary Hawk and Reverend Mary Cavalcante and Reverend Sir Ebony Nash and Reverend Brian Ellicott, and that was a wonderful ritual. I hope that you got to see it. If not, it was recorded, and you can certainly still see it. It's on all the pages that you would be seeing this on. You can also find that. And then afterwards, I had my private devotions for the full moon and the lunar eclipse that was happening last night. And we're still in the full moon now, so happy full moon to you. This is the worm moon. And with that lunar eclipse, both the symbolism of the worms returning to the earth and the disappearance and return of the moon make this very much a time for thinking about rebirth and new beginnings. And I hope that you are thinking about those things you want to see beginning in your life, as well as the things you want to let go of. This is very much a season for that. And that was my weekend. And I'll tell you, 6 months ago, I don't think I could have done that. But I'm very pleased to be healthy enough again to be able to go through a heavy ritual weekend. And I'm looking forward to many in the future. Of course, we have the lustration coming in May, the weekend of May 18th, which will be quite a heavy ritual weekend just by itself. And of course, the various sabbats. So watch for lots more ritual coming from us here. Some of it will be broadcast, some of it will be photographs, but we will certainly keep you in play with that. Keep you able to experience it vicariously, if not be here personally to experience it. And of course, the broadcast ones you can take part in right as they're happening. One of the reasons that we started doing all of this video and broadcasting 20 years ago was that we wanted people who perhaps were geographically isolated or isolated for other reasons to be able to feel they were taking part in a community, to feel that they could come to a ritual they could take part in Or if they couldn't come to it, at least they could have some experience of it through photographs, interviews, etc. And, a lot of people do this now, which is wonderful. I'm so happy to see so many different video and audio offerings in this area. And I definitely don't come from the point of view that any one is enough. We need all the ones we can get. So I happily encourage all of the different um, video networks, all of the different audio podcasts, all of the different magazines, etc., because we need to get our voice out there. We need to help those people who may not have a physical community near them to be part of their virtual community. We need to let the world know who we are, and we won't do that um, without getting these experiences to where people can share them. There are a lot of people. I made the statement not too awfully long ago that we may not all have the same friends, but we all have the same enemies. And I'll refer to that situation recently where one of our Corellian priestesses found a an otherwise unimportant politician accusing her of being a Satanist. This didn't actually grow any legs or go very far for a variety of reasons, one of which was the fact that we answered it so quickly. But when people can see what we do, they're not going to buy that kind of nonsense. It's based on their ignorance, their imagination of what we might do. So getting our public image more into the world is a very vital thing, in my opinion. So I certainly plan to continue working with video and audio and media of all sorts. And as you know, I've retired from some of the offices I formerly held. I am retired in office, which means that I'm not completely gone, but I've given up the daily aspects of those offices, partly so that I can focus on this. I've been doing it for many years, but not necessarily able to focus on it as much as I do now. And the publishing and the media really are where I plan to put my future efforts. And for those of you who are waiting on your copies of Reverend Don's Book of Astrology, they should be coming fairly soon. I will keep you updated on that. We'll probably talk about that on Wednesday when Chris Copeland joins us. Our schedule for this week is as follows. Today I'm going to talk about animism, and I'll be talking about that in a few minutes. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about shamanism. Wednesday we'll have Chris Copeland from Corellian Publishing. We'll be talking about all of the things going on there. Thursday I'm going to talk more generally about energy work. And then Friday will be our weekly roundup. And one of the stories I think I'm going to talk about in the weekly roundup is one that I've seen recently. The American Bible Society recently closed their, I think it was $60 million museum because it wasn't attracting any visitors. And I think there's a story in there to talk about. Mary says, one, she was very honored to be part of the ritual. We're very happy to have you as part of it. And we were very swift in answering that that ignorant person who is trying to revive the satanic panic at our expense. And Arlene says, I totally agree. And yes, we were very swift to answer that for reasons we talked about at the time, that the satanic panic shows every signs of people trying desperately, if largely unsuccessfully, to revive it. And it's a very dangerous thing. We really cannot have it. Well, I mean, we can only oppose it, but we cannot really have it be revived without expecting various problems to come from it. And hello to Lynn in the chat room. So we will always be very quick in answering that kind of story. Now, I want to talk today a little bit about animism, and I'm not entirely sure what all I'm going to say about it, but I'm going to start by pointing out that I consider myself to be an animist. I consider Corellianism to be among many other descriptors, an animistic religion. And this is right in the very first things you'll read about in the instructional materials that we have and various other places, the idea that everything is alive. That's what animism is. Animism is the idea that everything has a spiritual element. And can in that sense be said to be alive. Now, I want to take a moment to repeat the distinction that I made when I was talking about the recent IVF ruling. The difference between the idea that something may be alive and a life. As an animist, I'm sitting here looking at my computer. I believe my computer has a spirit, and for the most part, it's very cooperative. I've known people whose computers were not particularly cooperative. And that does not mean that I think it's a life, but it does mean that I believe it has a spiritual life. Um, in animism, we would say that everything, um, the rock in my ring, has a spiritual element. It has a life in that sense. Um, Most commonly, we'd say it has its own particular energy, but that's what we mean by that. That does not mean that it is a life in the same sense as myself or a puppy or various other sorts of things. I do draw a distinction between that. But I nonetheless do believe that it is alive at a spiritual level. And Bimby says, um, this is the kind of reason I was drawn to Wicca. I was anonymous even as a child, and people thought I was weird and didn't know it was actually a shared belief. And I did not know it was actually a shared belief until recently. You know, I've had so many people tell me that over the years. Um, so often I've run into people who say um, that Wicca felt like coming home to them. It was the things they already believed. They just never had a word for it. And this, of course, is Wicca in the large sense of the term, the sense that I use. There are people who use it in a very narrow sense, which you will not be finding me using. But in that large sense, I found so many people for whom it really was a system that, for the most part, they were already unconsciously practicing before they ever came to the religion as such. And I find that a very interesting factor. Now, Bimby says, I was always an animist as a child, and I didn't know um, what to call it. And yes, you know, I think most children have a natural sense of animism. Now, probably one of the best examples of animist religion that I can point to, other than our own, that people will recognize is Japanese Shinto. In Japanese Shinto, um, everything is alive. Anything can be a kami, a that which is worthy of being honored or worshipped, ranging from a living person to a mountain. Um, and I totally agree with that. I believe that the quality of the spirit is not necessarily connected to what is visible in the physical world, and that everything that exists has spirit. This is part of that idea of as above, so below. Um, Above is spirit, and everything above is spirit, everything below is spirit also, whether it shows or not. Um, I think it was Francis of Assisi who talked about walking gently on the rocks so that you don't hurt them, um, which is an animistic point of view. Now, I don't exactly agree with that point of view because I figure the rocks are built to be walked on. It's their nature. They um, are not soft and squishy as we are. Um, Midday says, my phone is being bratty today. Perfect example. Perfect example. And one that I think a lot of people can identify with. I think most of us who work with technology a lot will find occasions in our experience where the things that happen don't necessarily seem to correspond to what would happen in a non-animistic world. Uh, People who read tarot cards often talk about how temperamental their cards can be. Not my cards, but other people have that experience. Um, I find my cards are very cooperative at all times, but I also wouldn't be working with them under any other circumstances. One of the other things I'd say about animism is that although I believe everything has spirit, not all those spirits, at least in their expression in this world, are at equal stages of development. And there's nothing wrong with that. Uh, or at least their expression is not nearly at an equal um, stage of development. The spirit itself, of course, is. But, when you talk about the stone in my ring or the stones in the driveway, although our driveway doesn't have stone, well, yes, it does. It does have some gravel in it. Their experiences are very different from my experiences. That does not mean they're less valuable to their spirit. What they can express in this world is very different from what I can express. That doesn't make it less important. And this is part of the concept of animism. And in some cases, how best to express this? In some cases, those spirits just come into existence right at the start, and in other cases, they're built up. For example, the stone in my ring was once part of a much larger vein of stone. If it's a separate spiritual entity now, it wasn't then. It has split off and developed. But we've talked about souls splitting before. This is what souls do. This is how, for want of a better way to put it, they reproduce, they expand. Um, when we look at, well, I was speaking about Shinto earlier, and one of the most sacred kami in Shinto, I believe, is Mount Fuji. And the idea is that the entire mountain is a spirit with its own energy that is highly venerated. And of course, all the little individual things that are there also have their own spirit. But I would say that when we're talking about a location like that, that spirit develops over time. Uh, Partly out of all of the congregant spirits that are part of it. I believe houses do this sometimes. You walk into the ordinary house, it may have a it must have a spiritual element of its own, but you're not going to feel it. It doesn't have a lot of resonance, for want of a better way to put it. But that's not always true. And sometimes they develop tremendous spiritual resonance. Um, Often through things that have happened in them. I would think that in most cases, for example, um, if a house were, well, we know if a house is a scene of great happiness, it will develop a very happy energy. If it's a scene of great tragedy, it will often carry that energy forward. If it's a scene of worship, if there is a household temple within the house, that will influence its energy for a long time to come as well, at least unless it's dissipated. This is why ancient sacred sites often carry a great deal of energy. They were used for spiritual purposes for a long time, and it imbued the area. It imbued the spirit of the area. That's why if you go to some of these places, you can get, for want of a better way to put it, a spiritual infusion from the sanctity of the site. And also why, if you go to the scene of great tragedy or hardship, you really need to be careful to shield yourself from that energy as well, because you can certainly pick that up. But these are all aspects of animism. They're things you might not think about when you hear animism described, But when you hear it stated, you'll see it runs all through Corellian Wicca, at least. I won't speak for any other tradition. And this is very much part of all of the Corellian teachings. We don't use the term animist a lot, but we definitely are animists. And what should this mean to us? One of the things it should mean to us is that when we consider our relationship to the world, that we're certainly not dealing with something that is disposable or without its own spiritual existence. It means that we should be thinking that, yes, we're interacting with spiritual entities in every part of our life. In Greek mythology, there's a lot of talk about people's interaction with dryads, the spirits of trees, um, sometimes for the good and sometimes not so good. They definitely had a view, at least at certain points in their culture, that if you were going to cut down a tree, you better ask, because the dryad who lived there might be quite unhappy with you, especially if it was in a sacred grove, and then the patron deity of the grove might be unhappy as well. Um, I think that a little bit more of that point of view certainly wouldn't hurt us. When we talk about things like recycling, when we talk about things like, well, we've talked a few times about Sir Edward's worms. What do they have to do with any of this? Well, they are about revitalizing the earth. They're about revitalizing the soil. This is a very spiritual thing when you think of all these things as being alive, when you think of all these things as being part of your spirituality. So when we think about things like um, ecology and working with nature, we're not thinking as animists about interacting with an unconscious system, but with spirit. And as believers in reincarnation, which the majority of us are, we're also talking about our own future. These things should inform the way that we're thinking, just as our belief in the continuity of the soul, the afterlife, and reincarnation should also have to do with how we react to death when we experience it. We should have an effect from these beliefs in our lives. If we truly believe it, we should also be living it. Now, of course, every person will do that differently, some more completely than others, because we're human and we have our own limitations. And I am not one of those who thinks that everyone should be doing certain specific things, but I do think we should be mindful of it. When I talk a lot about not liking snow and winter, but I also understand completely the importance of these things, and would not for a moment want to not see them in the sense of their existence, even if am rather happy to have had a pretty mild winter. But I know that this is part of the Earth's rejuvenation every year, and it has a very important role. You cannot just not have it. Um, and this is true of all the different climactic things that we experience. They all have their roles, and those roles are important. And we naturally are concerned with the things that are more comfortable for us, but that is not always the highest consideration. I've often talked about the idea of divine justice. And I am actually a great believer in the idea of divine justice, as long as we understand that it's not our justice, it's divine justice. It's coming from a different point of view. Because, people will often say, how can such and such happen if there's a just deity? Well, the deity is not looking at it the way you're looking at it. And the things that are of great importance to us are not always the things that are going to matter from that point of view. And one of the things I do like to point out is that sometimes the things we think are great tragedies, when they happen to us, we later look back and realize were blessings. I've often talked about how when I severely injured my back some 30 years ago, it was absolutely devastating at the time and completely realigned the people around me for the most part in a way that was far more productive to my future life than where I had been. It was part of my Saturn return. It put me where I needed to be. I didn't know that when it was happening, and I certainly didn't think of it that way. But looking back on it, I do see that. Um, so we have to remember that what we think of as being good and pleasant in life is not always what life needs. And it's like um, some people think about the idea of a world without death. But how exactly would the world survive without death? Um, Certainly, we live longer than we once did, but life ultimately requires death to keep it going. We've talked about that in previous shows. The very soil that we walk on is largely built of the bodies of previously living creatures, particularly plants, also animals. And what would happen if none of them ever died? It would have to be a vastly different world. Um, Everything in this world is conditioned to the idea of life and death and the constant cycle involved in this and many other cycles. And as an animist, I would say that this too has its unique spiritual energy that is part of what we work with in spirituality. It is an important thing for us to consider. Now, with that, I see that we're coming down toward the end of our half hour. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about shamanism. Um, I'm going to be talking about it both in terms of what it is and the history of the practice and the history of the term. Because there's often a lot of controversy around the term, much of which comes from not having the slightest clue where it comes from. So we'll be talking about that a little bit tomorrow, and as well as other things going on in the world. So I hope you'll join me then. And again, if you have not already seen the solstice ritual from last night, or I'm sorry, the equinox ritual from last night, I'm getting ahead of myself. Um, it's not the first time I've done that, actually. So it's suggesting to me that solstice this year is going to have a strong importance connected to it, more than I would expect. But I don't know what yet. But I'm getting that little resonance coming. But the equinox ritual from last night, if you've not already seen it, I'd recommend going and watching it. It came off beautifully. It was a lovely ceremony, and I want to thank all the people who joined me for it. And I hope that you will watch it and enjoy it. And I'm going to be talking in coming weeks about some of those little resonances I'm getting out of the future. I'm going to be talking a lot more about the upcoming solar eclipse, which I think is very important. The Corellian tradition has a long history of interacting with solar eclipses. We'll be talking a little bit about that. Again, I have a feeling of something coming for the solstice this year, but I don't yet understand what that energy is. It keeps kind of coming into my consciousness. And that's one of the things that happens when you are practicing psychic. Sometimes you get things that you don't quite understand when they first come, but they become uh, clearer as you go. And at any rate, I hope that you've enjoyed the program. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow. And with that, let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to attune to the energies of the universe, to allow the universe to move us forward, and not to fight the cycles of existence, but to embrace them. Help us to enjoy and to venerate this beautiful world and all that is in it. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, with great love and respect, we thank you, and knowing you are always with us, yet from respect, we thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always also, and we'll see you tomorrow.